Austin, I'm excited to dive into this conversation, but first and foremost, man, how the heck are you doing right now?
Good, man. I'm good. I think been a busy day, busy week. We talked a couple days ago, but I'm doing well. Excited to chop it up and have a real conversation.
Yeah, man, I just gotta say, for those not looking at the visuals right now, they're just listening to the audio, they're missing out on some epic mood lighting that you got going on in the apartment right now.
Yeah, yeah. It gets dark at like 5:30 here now, so you got to spice it up a little.
It's an adjustment, man. It's an adjustment. Well, I wanted to dive into your story, and my goal at the end of this conversation is for people to have a better understanding of not only who you are as a person, but Wavy Dreamer and all of the other things that you do in this world. So let's start there with who the heck is Austin Sutor? How do you sum that up? Can you sum that up? I don't know.
You're not gonna ask me the usual question, how I describe myself.
Well, yeah, how do you describe yourself?
Um, I feel like I thought about this a lot because I knew this question or something like it was coming, but now
On the spot now, it's
I'm at
like,
a loss for words. I mean, I don't know. I think probably just someone that, is always, I think at this point, maybe I wasn't this way a couple years ago or a few years ago. I was just okay with kind of being who I was then. But I think now every day I kind of just get up with the approach of like, how can I improve, right? In any way, like in a relationship, in my job, you know, in the way that I think about things, the way that I process things, like what can I improve and how do I do that? And then how do I share that with other people through conversation, through what I write? Because ultimately, I think that I get a greater sense of fulfillment out of helping other people be better than anything else that, I do for myself. So I think that's kind of like the way I lead in my relationship and also just try to like walk through life that way and, be the example, maybe a quiet voice, but I think when I say something now, people tend to listen. So
mm,
I think that's kind of where I position myself.
I like that, man.
Yeah.
It might be quiet, but just because of the level of sound behind it doesn't mean it has any less value to it. I think is something that you and I have definitely vibed on over the past few years here. What shifted for you? Because you said maybe a few years ago you wouldn't have described yourself that way, but now you do.
Mhm.
Is there a specific moment in your life that you can point to and say, because of this, now I show up this way?
Um, I don't know if it was a specific moment, maybe a period of time where I think for a long time I did things for the approval of one person in particular or other people.
Mm,
As I started to age and like process life and when I was in college, right? Like I think I was trying to fit into this, I think this, but Jay Shetty, I think, says it well. Like we live in this perception of a perception of ourselves,
mm.
right? So like I'm not what you think I am, or I'm not what I think I am, but I am what you think I am, or something like that.
It's like a
Yeah, it's
mind-blowing
a mind.
concept.
But I think for a long time I just was stuck in like trying to be what someone else wanted me to be and not
Mm,
fully aware of like who I am and how can I like pull more of that out of me. So I think I went through that, growth process, right, where I got a little lost and I felt a little lost and wasn't sure like what value I brought to the world. And I questioned that at times. And, I struggled with depression and anxiety disorder and just these things that really were a culmination of not learning how to process my childhood experiences and then them coming out in my adult experiences and my relationships or just day to day and how I, interacted with other people and, walked through life at that point. So I think once I became more conscious of that, then I just started to see myself from a different lens and was able to
Mhm.
understand why I am the way that I am and how I can use that understanding to better myself. And I think you don't really get to that point unless you talk about those things with people. So whether that's
Yeah.
like through therapy or conversations with people you have relationships with, um, friendships, romantic relationships, whatever it is, right? Your family, you're not really probably not going to get to that point. I mean, reading may help, writing may help, but I think actually talking about it and like collecting feedback
Hmm.
from someone else really helped me. So, it takes some sense of like courage to do that and to really like open up about those things, especially with guys. I think that's part of why I shared what I write initially. And, to kind of overcome that perception of the toxic masculinity, like being an athlete in
Hmm.
college, looking a certain way, like, oh, I have to be cool and do what's cool and not try and not care about these things. But like, that's not me. That's what other people may want me to be or perceive me to be, but that's not really who I am. So, yeah, I think it was just kind of like a culmination of coming to that understanding. And then you kind of just have to drop like which is still tough. And I still struggle with it, I think, as everyone might a little bit, but just drop the thinking of really caring what anyone else thinks. I know that's cliche and it sounds like
Hmm.
nice to say, but you can really put it into practice when you just try something and you see like it's not that scary. It's not it's not going to harm you, it's not going to harm anyone else. And you kind of just open yourself up to a whole new world where you can then build relationships from that point, which isn't
Hmm.
surface level, like it's real. And I think that, I mean, I notice like people will introduce me to other people or they'll say something about me. And I think now the common things like he's a real ass dude, like that's what people would say. And I think 3 years ago, people wouldn't say that, or even 2 years ago, right? So it's just
Hmm.
about being real, but you have to be real with yourself first, before you can share that with other people. So I think I just looked myself in the mirror and tried to figure out who I am and what value I have separate from what anyone else wants me, to be.
Yeah. That's so well said. Um, a lot of trying to think of what I want to say in return because there's so much to dive deeper into there. One of the things that comes to mind, obviously, is that's mostly the ego talking when we are starting to play that game of I'm worrying about, well, what is Austin's perception of me gonna be with what I share next or what I ask next? And it's like that can oftentimes be the barrier from actually having that real conversation, actually having that deeper
Right.
connection, you know what I mean, that can exist. So,
Yeah.
what was kind of that first? I mean, you mentioned a couple different things that have worked for you, having the conversation, having it with loved ones, having it with people in relationships, therapy, all of that. Was that the first place you started, or did the writing come first?
I think I was always pretty good at communicating like my feelings. I think
Mm,
part of it was maybe because of my experiences growing up. I had parents that were divorced. I had a dad who didn't create space for me to do that, and I had a mom who did. When we talk about like creating space for those types of conversations and like authenticity and just being able to lay it all out there, I have two just like opposite examples, right? Like I've
yeah.
go one place to the next and split time here, split time there. I had to like almost be a different person depending on what environment I was in. And I think I could really be myself and like lean into that when I was at my mom's house, and then at my dad's house, I couldn't. My dad might
Mm,
hear this, but that's okay. Um, but I think that, I don't know. I mean, maybe just like the times where I felt so misunderstood or wished I could have explained how that person was making me feel when they were being the way that they were being to me, I thought of every possible way I could explain it so that they would understand it, but I never had the chance to explain it. And I think through that like depth of thinking and trying to understand what way can I explain this to someone so that they actually listen and they actually understand the impact that their words are having on me or their actions are having on me. And I think just from that, like I would go to this quiet place and, you know, a therapist would describe it as disassociating. And that's technically a disorder, but I think that that is where I create what I think. And it's weird to look at it that way. And I don't think I've ever even came to that conclusion until just now, but I think that's really like where I developed that skill to be able to communicate things in the way that I think I do so that I can be understood and also so that I can create space to understand other people, right? So same way that you do on our group calls and, you know, through your work, it's the same. I think it's the same concept, maybe a little less structured and less researched, right? But, you know, I think that was just like my way of doing it. And I would usually lead with just being open. And I think that allowed other people to be open with me. At least that's what I've kind of noticed, like in friendships, relationships, and people coming to me for advice for things, or just knowing that like they can talk to me and be real with me about something where, you know, we've talked about this before. We have other friendships where that just isn't the case, right? So I think that's like really where it started. And then the writing really just helped me process like childhood trauma. That's kind of what I started when I was early on in therapy and just processing and working to understand that and its effect on me and how to work through that, learn how to self-soothe, do those things that help me now today, that are part of my process. But I think that writing just allows me to put ideas that I have or that I see and expand upon on paper or, you know, the notes section of my phone. And I can always go back and reference it, right? Like every time I think of something that makes me feel a certain way, that like moves me or makes me feel like, oh, I'm really like learning something from this thought. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone listening, but like, you know what I mean? Like you have those moments where you just come to certain conclusions about things, or you think of something, you're like, oh, that's cool. Let me write that down so I can like revisit it. I think I just started doing that really consistently in a journal and also in a notes section on my phone. And I would like go through it late at night a lot of the time, and then just write more and try to create something that made me feel like I was telling that story. Like I was explaining what I was experiencing as I came to that thought, and how can I share that with other people in a way that is like telling a story, capturing their interest, and also providing some value to them in some sense, right? Like that's the goal. Because I noticed the value it provided to me just to write things down and see it. And now it's like, okay, how do I help other people? Because, you know, I think that became a passion of mine, but then it's that whole, your passion is for you, your purpose is for others, right? How do I turn my passion to a purpose and help other people? And I think I just started to think about that. And that's what kind of led to, you know, sharing what I, for a long time, just wrote in a journal to myself, to my inner child, but now trying to do it in a way that allows me to connect with other people. And there's something that I saw, I think one time, it says like, it said, chances are if it moves you, then it'll move other people too. And I think there's a lot of times where like we have thoughts or feelings or whatever you want to call it, that it moves us, like it makes us feel a certain way, right? But we don't share it a lot of the time. Maybe we keep it to ourselves, but maybe if we shared it, that would be like the starting point to a healthier relationship or a deeper friendship, right? Or deeper understanding of a parent-child bond, right? Or something like that, and how we can evolve that over time through that deeper understanding. But I think a lot of, just from observing people in my life, a lot of people don't say those things, that maybe they don't know how to say it, which is one hurdle to overcome, or they fear the reaction of the other person. So I think it's just, that's also part of kind of writing and sharing it with other people, trying to share something that will make them think about how they can then communicate better.
Mm.
But I think it goes back to that same point, right? Like you have to take accountability for yourself and your actions. You have to take ownership of that first, and you have to help yourself first before you can help other people, right? So I think once you like do that with yourself, and I think that just all those things kind of go into that. But I don't know, I think writing is just a powerful way to share those type of messages with people, because it's something that they can read, on their time. They can save it, go back to it. They can write it in their own way, take something that someone else said and just make it their own, so that it means more to them and is specific to maybe their situation, and it sparks some thought in them that allows them to just continue to think around those topics. Whereas if they weren't thinking about those things, they may not reach that higher understanding of their self or of the situation or other people. So, yeah.
It's provocative. It gets the people going,
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
love that little sound bit there. Maybe we'll voice it over.
It gets me going a little bit. I think, some people like it. Everyone has, especially on like social media today, right? Everyone has their own varying levels of tolerance for different things. So you have to kind of understand that you're not going to reach everyone, but if you
that's not why you do it either.
Exactly.
The cool thing.
Yeah.
One thing a thought that came to mind, and maybe it's a connection, maybe it's not. You had mentioned the disassociation, and that was kind of how you processed in the past. Do you think your experience as growing up in baseball led or encouraged that sort of behavior? Because it is always kind of preached in athletics, right? The next play mentality. Like if you threw a bad pitch, forget about it, next one. Am I drawing a connection there that doesn't exist? Or what was your experience there? Like, did it reinforce that kind of behavior? I would just be curious to know your experience.
Yeah, I think athletics is a little bit, maybe not a little bit, maybe a lot like that. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think that type of mentality was instilled in me, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it can certainly help people get to a certain point. But I think it was more so just maybe it is tied into it, like that next play mentality, or how do I get better next time, right? Like that's
and maybe because I would argue, I mean, in my experience, I would argue that is good when it has its place.
Yeah.
But it can't be the only, like, that can't be the default program that we run in every scenario in our life.
Yeah, definitely not. You have to take time to slow down and dissect what just happened, right? And try to extract the lessons from it. But I think, I don't know, I'd say more so my experience with disassociation was more in relation to the fact that I had someone in one ear that told me, like, just block it out, right? And that was my mom's experience. And I think that's something that as you go through, I won't speak to it too much, but I think it's interesting, like as you grow up, people think that, trauma is like something traumatic, but it can be very like minuscule and almost like impossible to notice at times.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because while that type of response to me going like, hey mom, this makes me feel a certain way, this is what's happening with dad, that response of like, just block it out, like that's how he is, while it's kind, it's also very ineffective.
Mm.
It doesn't teach you how to deal with things as they are. It teaches you how to deal with them as we wish them to be. Right.
Yeah.
So that's where like the dissociation was for me of I didn't have the tools and the skills to self-soothe and to process those experiences on my own internally.
I don't think any of us do though, especially at a
Yeah.
younger age, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely tough, but even someone that has a great childhood and, the perception is everything's perfect, right? There's nothing
Mm.
wrong. Their parents are still together. They're happy. They're a good example. They're in love, whatever it is, like they live a good life. Mom could still be smothering, and that can actually be for some children like trauma. And
Mm.
that affects the way that they build relationships in their adult life. That affects the way they love, all of those things. And, trauma, like I said, isn't just like someone smacking you over the head and like
Yeah.
bleeding. Like it's very, words can obviously cause trauma as well. But I think it's just more delicate than that. Like it's very, I don't know, it's very interesting. I wish I had a PhD and I wish I could like break it down more, but I only understand it to the extent of my experience and maybe just some examples of others, but it's super interesting to like try to break down those things and understand, to me
Yeah.
at least, like why people are the way that they are, right? Like what really were your experiences that made you that way? And I think at a certain point in life, I feel like I kind of started to get there,
Hmm.
but you almost get to this place where you can just like observe someone and not really know much about them, but you can almost like infer maybe what their experience was like.
Mm.
And if you see the way that they are in their relationship with their significant other, maybe, or
Yeah.
you see the way they are in group settings, or you see the way, that they just come across one-on-one, right? Like it's just, you can kind of maybe make some assumptions and piece those things together. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I think what really comes to mind there is just that concept around experiences, right? And our perception of other people's experience oftentimes, I think, gets in the way of connection. And you and I have talked about this, like social media. I think you shared a post a few weeks ago about sometimes I look at my Instagram feed and wish that I had the life that was being lived inside those squares. I probably butchered that, but the
Honestly.
concept is there, right? Like how often are we looking at our own lives in the form of our social media feed and wishing, damn, that was pretty dope. Like that guy went to Sedona, that guy went to Arizona, like I look at when the Giants were in the playoffs and I was like, damn, Austin's in San Francisco. Now he's in LA. This dude's all over the place. Like, I wish I had his life.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we're never sitting with one another long enough to actually receive and hear and actually understand your experience beyond the squares.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I think you shared a podcast with me with NQ and Atticus,
Yeah.
and that's where that post and the idea derived from. I don't know if I directly quoted it or just added to it a little bit, but I mean, I think we've all probably experienced that feeling where we look at like our highlight reels and we wish we had that life, and that's just not the reality. And I think that's almost hard to accept, but once you accept
Hmm.
it, you can move past it and say, okay, like, how do I share my actual reality? And I think that's where like me sharing what I write, comes into play, because that's my reality, right? Like I typically, initially, at least when I started sharing, like would write deeper things, and maybe it makes some people uncomfortable. Maybe it
Hmm.
talks about the loss of life. Maybe it talks about doubting yourself, or dealing with depression, or questioning your place in this world. But like those are real thoughts that everyone has.
Hmm.
If they didn't have it, like people wouldn't have, you know, it wouldn't have resonated with people to the point where X amount of people now follow an account that posts things like that, right? So I think like we need to do a better job of encouraging that type of vulnerability and authenticity, but also understand that that's not for everyone. Like while
Hmm.
I have friends, like probably my best friend is my best friend from high school, and he, I know, has struggled with certain things on his time and through his experience, and we've talked about it one-on-one, but he's never going to be someone that is comfortable enough to go share that experience with the world, right, on social media. And that's fine. Like I understand that. I know that like there's still depth to that relationship, and he's still a very real person, so to speak.
Hmm.
But that's just not for everyone, right? But he can create space still in friendships to make me feel like, as his friend, I can go to him and talk to him about anything. So it doesn't just have to be on
Yeah.
social media, if you're not a big social media person, but you can still do it in your relationships. And I also think, even if you're not a big social media person and you're not sharing things that often, you can help move that like mission forward by not judging the people that are doing those things.
Mm.
Maybe it's not for you, but maybe it's for them. Like, and that's what people have to understand, that we all, and I think this is like a Kobe video that I maybe shared recently, but learning how to dance beautifully in your own box, right? It's the
Mm.
same thing as like, you have your cup, I have my cup. Your cup is yours to drink. Why would I focus on what's in your cup? I should focus on what's in mine. That kind of a concept. Like if you learn to just dance beautifully in your box, then you learn to judge other people's boxes less,
Yeah.
and compare less, and just understand that like your box is for you and theirs is for them. Like they don't have to do things for you or anyone else. They're doing it for themselves. Ultimately, that's why I started writing and sharing what I had written, because it made me feel like I had a voice and a place in this world. And I think that initially I was just looking for some sort of validation around that.
Mm.
And then I got it, and it was like, holy shit, like I actually do have a voice, and I do mean something to people. People that don't even know me reach out to me and say, like, seeing this helped me get through my day, or seeing this saved my life. Like I've received those messages at times. And I think that that's just like the power of being vulnerable and putting yourself in those positions where you open yourself up to those experiences. But the more we limit like what we think is possible from that standpoint, or what we perceive someone else to be doing, like the
Hmm.
less opportunity there is for more people to do things like that, because then they fear the judgment of other people. So I think that also ties into something I wanted to bring up and thought about. There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and I'm not sure if you read that book. I forget who
I'm
the
not
author,
familiar, but I'll have to check it out.
but it's a very good book. And in part of the book, it talks about like we spontaneously anticipate the judgment of others, right? So therefore, the vocabulary used in that judgment matters, because at the end
Mm.
of the day, people are going to judge regardless. But if we can enhance the vocabulary that they use in those judgments, then we limit some of the anxiety, or decrease some of the anxiety associated with spontaneously anticipating those judgments before we share something, right? If we look at something that we're about to share and say, I don't know, like this may make people uncomfortable, right? But if those people on the other end of that have the enhanced vocabulary and understanding of really the world, and choose to judge it, maybe, but judge it in a different way than they would have in the past. In the past, it's maybe like, oh, that person's weird, or that's crazy, or that's not for me, right? instead just switch it and say, that's interesting, or I would like to know more, or I wouldn't like to know more,
Mm,
you know? But like, you don't have to say like, that's crazy, or that's stupid, or like, what can I learn from him? You know, just say that's interesting, or yeah, that makes you think, or, that's not for me. Maybe I unfollow them. That's fine. Right. Like,
yeah.
but you don't have to judge it in such a harsh way. And I think the words that we use in those judgments really matter, because then those echo in the chambers that we live in, right? Like if someone sees something I post and this has happened. There was a girl that played lacrosse at Hopkins that saw something I posted before I made the Wavey Dreamer account, took a screenshot of it, shared it in a group chat with other people that played lacrosse at Hopkins, and I got a screenshot of it. And she said, I'm about to unfollow him.
Mm.
Like something else along like the lines of what I posted. And it's funny because she still follows me today. And
I hope she's listening. No.
it's just like, like
You know what I
the
mean?
amount of effort that it takes to take a screenshot of something, put it in a group chat, and say something negative about something that
Mm,
someone else is doing for their own experience, not for yours, is just like, why not take the time to try to understand it better before you do something like that? And I don't blame that person at all. Like, I think
yeah.
they're a great person and I wish them the best. There's no like ill will associated with saying that, because I used to be that person. I used to do that to other people. And I know that we all grow at different times and reach different levels of that type of understanding, at different
Hmm.
points in our life. But, it's just like, it's so much easier to judge than it is to understand. That's why more people choose to judge quickly than to take the time to understand. And I think
Yeah.
that there's something to be said for that. And if you can just kind of, put those messages out there, or at least demonstrate how to do that, then you open more people up to that. And I think that, that obviously just leads to better people, a better world, a better experience.
Yeah. I think we are just so quick to judge. And in a lot of ways, I don't know if that's getting any better. If anything, it's probably getting worse with just how social media, how our generation is being marketed and pushed. The fact that like longer form content like this
Yeah.
doesn't do as well as a 15-second clip would do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because we would much rather take just 15 seconds out of our life to get a snapshot of, okay, who is Corey, who is Austin? Should I care enough about either of them to dive into a deeper discussion between the two of them? Is that of interest to me? What value does that provide? And yeah, I don't know. I think we are so quick to judge just as human beings because we're living such busy lives. We're rushing through our life so much these days where it's just easier. It's easier to take the screenshot and talk negative
Yeah.
than it is to shoot you a DM and say, I'm having trouble understanding this.
Yeah.
Because that piece of content that you put out is now questioning my perception of who I thought you were. And instead of raising that question, it's just easier to say, yo, I think Austin's lost it. I think he's gone crazy, man. Like, you
Yeah.
see what he's posting online these days? Like, this
Yeah.
is
Yeah. People,
who is this guy?
yeah.
That's just an interesting thing.
I think it's, it's interesting because our generation has also grown up in this world of advancement, and
Mhm.
social media being a huge part of that advancement. And I think that like as our, let's say 20, well, I guess now all the way down to anyone that has a phone, right? But up to,
Everyone these
yeah,
days, right?
maybe 30, like 30-ish, right?
Yeah.
Um, in the world of Instagram, I think Instagram really like has amplified things, but Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, not so much like Twitter, now TikTok, right? But our, our generation has grown up like with an experience that nobody's ever experienced before
Mm.
us. So there's nothing to learn from. So like we define that. And how are we going to define that as a generation, right? Like, what are we going to teach our children? Because, a lot of us are going to start to have children of our own soon. And what example are we setting, and how are we becoming better with the use of those things in our lives? Because ultimately that's going to echo in like eternity, really. And I think that's something that people really need to take ownership of. And it may not be that important to you as an individual right now. You may like hear that and think like, oh, that doesn't really matter, but it matters. Like people say every vote matters. There's going to come a point in time where, a lot of people say, nah, my vote doesn't really matter, right? But every vote really does matter in that sense. Like, I think it's the same kind of thing. I don't know. It's hard to do, right? But there's so many people that a lot of us probably associate with that, that'd be a hard thing for them to understand. But, I think it's something that everyone has to work to understand how they can be better with that and be more real on these platforms where there's a lot of people that just chase like the clout and the fame and all the things that we associate with like the negative aspect of these platforms.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I designed a like early logo or just like quote or motto for Forever Athlete and just trying to sum it up. And it really got me thinking. I was like, well, how do you sum that up? Like I think it's the same thing with your brand with Wavey Dreamer, but I had like live life outside the box. And the more we're having this conversation, the more I'm loving the like deeper meaning behind it. Like I was just thinking live life outside the box of just the mold that we're putting ourselves in, but it could also be applied to this conversation around social media. Like live your life outside of the boxes that are social media. Like don't live your life to get the perfect Instagram picture or write the perfect thing to share on Instagram to get however many likes you want to get on it, but truly live your life for yourself and take ownership of that. What I think is really interesting, what I've noticed in my experience is I've really shifted over the past few years to being really drawn more to people that authentically take ownership of their life and they aren't afraid to really just be themselves. And the people that aren't, I've just distanced myself from.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it sounds like very similar to your experience. I want to ask you about Wavey Dreamer at this point. You know what I mean? I love your explanation of it. So I would love to just throw you a softball, but why Wavey Dreamer?
Yeah. When you texted me that, I guess it was yesterday or earlier today, about like what we talk about, and mentioned that was really the only thing you mentioned. It just got me thinking more about it. And
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot that goes into it, and there's like a whole story here too that kind of ties into what we were just talking about. And I think it really started probably, as I said, like as I was aging through college, in therapy, started writing and noticed it helped me, but then I just started writing to write also.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a little bit after college. My grandmother passed away. And, I think that experience kind of was like, that was the first loss of life of someone really that I was close with. Like I had seen other people in my family pass away, but that was the first person that I had a very close relationship with that passed away. And it kind of put me in obviously a place that type of thing can put people in at times. But
yeah,
I think I felt a little lost. This was around the time that we were actually working at New Day. And then after that experience, I went to Thailand for a little bit and was supposed to teach English there for longer than I was there for. But anyway, all that to say, around that time, started this blog, Wavey Dreamer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think noticing how I had written before, thought before, the idea was really like, we live in waves of consciousness, life's up and down. Every wave eventually crashes, but they're beautiful when they do. And there's a moment of brilliance in every wave. And if we find those moments and hold on to them, that's really what makes life a meaningful experience, right? And a valuable experience that we can then share those moments with other people, those lessons, right? So that was kind of like one part of it. But the other part of it has to do with my grandparents, their experience, my mom. And my grandfather, when my mom was in high school, was paralyzed. He was pulled under a wave, his head snapped back and hit a rock, and he was paralyzed for a few years. When my mom was, in her like teenage years, obviously that's a big, big part of someone's life.
Yeah.
It shapes their experience in the course of their life, really, their character, the qualities that, she developed and all of that from her experience. So I think that, I thought about it just on a deeper level, like that experience that she had and that experience that my grandmother had really shaped who they became and who they were to me. And who they were to me is why I am the way that I am today. And I think that everything good in me comes from those two people. And I think that that's like what I leaned into when I didn't know what else to lean into, when I didn't have a good example on the other side. And like, my mom, my grandmother, both of them were like essentially my rocks in that sense, and made me feel loved when I didn't know if I even loved myself. And I think that like the way that my mom was with me, she learned that from her mom, right? My grandmother and her experiences. So, all that to say that I think that's really like where the name came from and what it means to me. And then back to my experience when I initially had an intention of sharing this and starting to write, I saw a Snapchat, and it wasn't necessarily ill-intended, but I saw it, and it was something I had received like shortly after I started writing a few things on this blog and shared it. And it was a Snapchat of people that I was friends with, and I'm still friends with, some of them from college, and this was shortly after college. And they were sitting around, and someone was reading what I had written out loud in almost a way that was like mocking it. And people were laughing at it. And I saw that. And then there was like a 2-year gap between me ever sharing anything again. And, I think that experience, like I thought back when I met, I started writing and sharing things probably a year and a half ago, the concept of Wavey Dreamer in the Instagram account and sharing in that way with like an alias, so to speak, more so came about within the past year. And my fiance played a big part in like pushing me to do that and making me feel like confident enough to actually do something like that. I had no idea like it would be what it is now and have as many followers as it does. Like that was never really my intention with it. It was always, if I can help someone by sharing this, then it will be worth it, right? Just one person. Just help one person not give in to that type of feedback or that type of reaction, right? And I think that I'm still friends. Some of those people are coming to my wedding, right? Like it's not, in some sense, it's a reflection of them, right? It's a reflection of them in the past. It's not a reflection of who they are today. And it's the same way that like where they were committed to they weren't committed to understanding me in that moment, me today. I think that was a big like hurdle for them, because in college I had been someone else, or at least I didn't show them that side of me. I
Mm-hmm.
showed them like, yeah, I care about going out and drinking and hooking up with girls and baseball and all this, like that's whatever. But that's not, they didn't know me for anything outside of that, right? And I think that that almost limited their ability to understand me in a different way. And then they weren't committed to understanding me in a different way, because it would have been so easy to say, hey, what does this mean to you? And I think the perception is like, you see this, you see me doing this, and it's Wavey Dreamer, like, oh, that sounds cool. Like he's saying he's wavy, whatever. But that's not what it was, right? Like it means so much more to me than that. But nobody ever asked me what it meant to me. They just chose to mock it in that way, which, like, again, don't blame those people. I love a lot of them, but like, I don't know. It's interesting because for a long time, it was like when I started actually writing and sharing as recently as like a year and a half ago, it was almost like I was trying to prove those people wrong
Mm.
or prove something to them. And we talked about this before, right? But like people that do something out of the box or push boundaries or tend to do something creative in a way that may be different than people expect are really going to be people that are, in our generation, probably.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing it in a way through social media. And a lot of us have a past and a lot of us have grown over the years. And a lot of the people that follow us or that we follow on social media are from our past. And they know a former version of ourselves, and they don't know the current version or the future version we're trying to create
Mm-hmm.
through what we're doing. And it's just an interesting like dichotomy where, you have like, I don't know, it's very like, it's very easy to get lost in that and not do something creative that you have this feeling that you want to do, or not share something that you feel you want to share. But at the same time, like you have to, I tried to like talk myself through this as much as they were committed to like not understanding who I was trying to be and becoming, because they were so connected with this former version of myself and this perception that they had of who I was. I also had to not be so connected to the former version of them. And I had to be committed to giving them another chance and understanding who they are today, because they've grown in the same way probably that I have over the past couple of years, right? So I think it's just, it goes both ways. And, I think you don't know unless you try, right? Like you just got to put yourself out there. And, if you want to create something, I always say it, but like, if you create something and it moves you, then it will move other people. And if you want to share it and feel inclined to share it, then fucking share it. You'll find your tribe. You'll find people that want to be a part of that. So, yeah, that's really like where it came about.
Dude. And that is what, ladies and gentlemen, what we call growth and maturity and all of the things, man. I always appreciate your perspective and the insights that you have. I mean, the level of growth that is required to be able to look back and just come to the realization that like you aren't, like we are all a product of a million past versions of ourselves at this point in time.
Yeah.
And we have a million more versions of ourselves that we will grow and live into. And all we can do in this present version of ourselves is to do the best that we can to live into it and not pass judgment for maybe who Austin was 2 weeks ago or 2 years or 4 years, 6, whatever. And same for myself. But I love your introspection there and just perspective of the whole situation. I want to ask a couple of last questions here as we wind things down. I feel like we've really covered a lot where people could go back and really listen to different bits and get a new perspective each time that they listen to some things, which is what I love about our conversations.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you the fast five. We'll keep it light. We'll keep it rapid fire. They're one sentence, one word. And the first one is, what's your go-to podcast that you're jamming out to?
There's a couple. Jay Shetty's is really good. I also like Sophia Bush's.
Mm.
Both of those probably would be the two.
Dude, Jay Shetty is coming in hot. Not the episode before this, but two ago, that was the answer on purpose by Jay Shetty.
Yeah.
And the next question is, go-to book that you've read in the past year.
Go-to book in the past year. Geez, I don't know. I probably haven't spent as much time reading as I should in the past year.
Been too busy writing, man.
Probably Think Like a Monk. Yeah.
That was exact. I got to put you in touch with Bob A, the bearded man, because those first two answers very similar. Number three, what's something that you can't live without?
My dog.
Good choice. Number four, what's a quote you live by?
Oh, a quote I live by. That's a good one. Being okay if it happens, or being, what is it? Being okay. Geez, I'm gonna botch it. It's like
Okay.
being okay if it happens and okay if it doesn't is a very powerful place to be.
I love that.
Yeah.
If you could sum up your focus at this point in time, or an intention, what would, just one word, what would that be?
Creating. Actually, I'll switch that. Impacting. Yeah.
Impacting through creating.
Yeah. You said one.
Yeah, one word. Fair enough. Fair enough. I changed the rules. I would love, do you have anything nearby that you like, a piece of writing that you would like to share, or even a post that has really resonated with you lately, or it's just something on your mind right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can share something. It's a little bit longer, but since it's not too long. Let me find it real quick.
If they're still with us at this point, man, they might as well see it through, right?
Yeah,
you got to see it through.
So it's interesting. I actually shared this as a part of what I wrote and spoke about at my grandmother's funeral, which was obviously a big inspiration for, like, she would be that person that was, if I ever like was second guessing myself, even though she wasn't alive at the time, she'd be the person to say, Austin, just fucking do it. Like, I love that. The encouraging spirit, that voice in my head that pushed me in that direction to create what's allowed me to be who I am today, and share that with so many people. So it was, really a lot. The beginning of it was just about, and I'll share it with you. It's our parents give us life. Our grandparents give us a sense of who we are and where we came from. We look up to our grandparents with a sense of awe, as they represent so much history and so many memories. As time begins to show on the faces of our loved ones, we begin to listen more closely and seek out answers to questions we didn't even know we had. And then it just kind of goes into how I've listened over the years and how her tales have unraveled. But then I get to this point of, I saw this movie, and maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't, but it's called Collateral Beauty, and it's with Will Smith. And I talk about this line that really resonated with me. So I'll read it and then read from this point. This is the quote from the movie. We're here to connect love, time, death. How these three things connect every single human being on earth We long for love. We wish we had more time, and we fear death. I take this to mean that there is no beginning and end. Love doesn't have to stop when life ends because death is just a symbolic beginning. Love is with us in all forms. In death, there is love. And in order for us to know what love is, we need time. Time is the only constant concept in the world. It heals all wounds, gives us duration to learn, and teaches us to be patient. We only feel time when we feel it in our bodies. It is set to measure existence, but really, what is time? It's when you interact with the people you love to create an impact, to live a life full of love that not even death can conquer. So love transcends time and death, and we need time to develop love, and we need love to understand and accept death. We need death to make the use of our time meaningful. But in time, there's no death if we are filled with love by the people who love us back. So it's those moments of love that we cherish with our friends and family, those moments and the people we share them with make our lives a beautiful existence. Life is the sum of the good and the bad moments which we go through, and that is the collateral beauty. So that's it. And I talk a little bit more about, how that beauty lives on through people in my family and myself. But that's really kind of like when I shared that was like the first moment for me where I realized like I actually believe I have a gift. And now how do I share that with people? And I think that it took sharing something like that in an uncomfortable setting to have people then come up to me and say like, you're very good at writing. And that was very well said and well spoken. And that was, around the time prior to when I had started that blog initially. But if my grandmother hadn't passed away, I wouldn't have had that experience. But if she was alive and I told her the story of receiving that Snapchat, she probably would have gotten me to get back to writing a bit quicker. Than it all comes together. So special.
I had this imagery kind of going in my head as I was just receiving and soaking in each word. And I don't know if you did this intentionally or not as you were writing, but it was this motif of the waves and how I don't know if it was purposeful, but contrasting life and death as you did.
Yeah.
It was in this constant tide that I would see in the ocean.
Yeah.
So
I think we live that way. We think that way, right? Our life becomes a result of our thoughts ultimately. So I don't know. It sounds morbid, but I think the best thing that sometimes we can do for our life is think about our death and think about what that means to us and what we would want it to mean to other people. Right. And I don't know. I think about that a lot, maybe more than I should, but I think it's a really powerful thing to think about and think about your ending, because a lot of people say that endings help us energize. They help us encode and understand and restart. But think about your ending and then restart.
Yeah. And I think having those thoughts to allow you to truly make sure that you're living living a good story. Talk about another Austin-based brand that I just love their mission behind it. But yeah, it is. We have to have this concept of that time of death. That's a part of who we are.
Right. Life. I wish it was my quote and something I wrote, but it's life's beauty is inseparable from its fragility. It's kind of that concept. Like we walk down the street sexy until one day we're unseen. We walk around healthy until a diagnosis brings us to our knees, that kind of concept. And we really do live on borrowed time. And I think that's it's difficult to live that way and to be conscious of that all the time, because obviously that's a heavy thought. But, I think that if you think about it every once in a while and check in with yourself and check in with what that means to you, that's a powerful thing. And that helps you energize and code, like I said, and understand where you can maybe hit a refresh button or reset and, create the life that you want to experience.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. Before we wrap, Austin, I just want to acknowledge you, and as your friends would say when they introduce you, you are a real ass dude. But I really appreciated this conversation today. The depth at which you are willing to take your experience and share is admirable. And one of the things that does come to mind is, I think vulnerability is different for everyone. We all have different levels to it, and what might be a depth for you might be different than someone else is willing to go with whatever their stage and experience is. But just want to acknowledge you for your true transparency and the way you show up. It's definitely impacted me in my life. So thank you. Where can those listening in find more of you, find more Wavey Dreamer, connect with more of your writing, and just send you some love, man?
Yeah, I mean, at Wavey Dreamer on Instagram, but I'd also say, I have like a community of friends that do something similar in their own way, like yourself, James Boria, and people like that. And I think that by connecting with them as well, that connects with me. And I think that that's really the direction and the steps that I think we should all take. And, I don't know, just putting other people on and making sure that, they're a part of your story and living out your experiences together and sharing in them, like the success as much as the hurdles and the dips. Because, I don't know, when I don't feel like myself, conversations I have with you make me feel more like myself. When I feel down and look at a post that James does, or maybe someone else that I haven't mentioned, like that lifts me up a little bit. So yeah, that's where you can find me, in those people too.
Hell yeah, man.
Yeah.
You just brought up, I mean, the motto that I chose to go with, especially for this show, is that we go further together. We're able to grow further together for sure. So Austin, again, I appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, you're tuned in to Forever Athlete Radio, where together we go far. And we just did that today. So I appreciate you tuning in with us, and I will see you all next time.